December 3rd, 1944. Hürtgen Forest. Cold that gets under your skin. Not the kind that merely chills, but the kind that grinds into your joints and refuses to leave. Trees stand like black skeletons, their bare limbs clawing at a sky the color of ash. Fog sits low, a living thing that eats sound. Far off, artillery thumps with a slow, patient rhythm. A giant heartbeat counting down. Inside, an M4 Sherman crouched behind a shattered brick farmhouse. Gunner Harlan Vickery presses his face to the eyepiece of the 75mm. The turret is turned the wrong way, rotated a full 180 degrees, pointing at the woods behind them. The loader, Private Mike Rizzo, glances at him and mutters, "You actually doing this backwards setup thing, Vickery?" Harlan doesn't answer. His breath ghosts the glass. His fingers are white on the firing mechanism. He listens. He thinks. Through the mist, a shape slides into view. A panther, German, massive and patient, followed by two more like shadows on treads. They move slow, arrogant, the forest their cover. Harlan breathes out. One shot. The 75mm cracks the dawn. The round tears through freezing air and finds metal. The lead panther explodes in a geyser of steel and flame. The two behind shudder and stall, the forest swallowing their hesitation. They weren't expecting a shot from behind a collapsed farmhouse. They sure as hell weren't expecting a Sherman to snipe at distance. Inside the turret, the loader swears. The commander, Staff Sergeant Gene Corbin, who always trusted action over theory, howls, "Holy hell, Vickery, you clipped him clean." But Harlan doesn't cheer. He's already moving the turret, tracking the second target. This is not luck. This is calculation. This is a farm boy from Whitley County, Kentucky, rewriting a rulebook no one knew needed rewriting, turning his Sherman into a long-range hunting rifle by turning it backwards and becoming, for a few absurd minutes, a one-man anti-tank team. They'd laughed at him when he first spoke of it. They stopped laughing when the smoke cleared and the Germans stopped moving. Harlan Vickery hadn't been born into tanks. He was small, quiet, the sort of boy who learned to fix tractors with greasy hands and patient fingers. His father tilled a modest farm. His mother taught school. After Pearl Harbor, he enlisted because it felt like the right thing to do. He never pictured himself inside an M4, facing down some of the deadliest metal on the continent. At Fort Knox, instructors noticed his steady hands and a way of thinking that wasn't reflexive but mathematical. Range, wind, lead numbers he could fold in his head while others fired from muscle memory. He was not flashy. He did not seek notice. In a war that often rewarded big personalities, Harlan drifted through the ranks until Europe stripped everything bare and only results mattered. By August 1944, his unit had hit French soil and then pushed east. The Allies had broken out of Normandy. Now they were fighting through hedgerows, hills, and forests. Terrain that loved ambushes and punished the bold. The Sherman was ubiquitous. More than 49,000 built, reliable and easy to fix, but outgunned at range and under-armored against Panthers and Tigers. Men joked it was a Ronson, lit up the first time, every time. Still, used with cunning, the Sherman could bite back. After months of skirmishes and near misses, the crew's bond tightened. Staff Sergeant Corbin kept things blunt. Drive, shoot, survive. But Harlan saw a different path. Survival, he decided, would come not from blunt force but from surprise, from thinking like the hunter instead of the hunted. One cold night, while cleaning the barrel after a long patrol, he laid it out to his crew. What if we park it facing away from the road, rotate the turret all the way around, and fire from the rear? We back in quiet, take the shot, then drive forward to retreat. Smaller profile, better cover, fire first. Corbin stared and laughed. The kind of laugh that tests a man. That's the dumbest damn thing I've heard. But Harlan had already worked through the angles in his head. He'd done the math. He'd imagined the shot. That morning in the Hürtgen Forest, the math and the imagination met the enemy. The rest, for a handful of frozen, furious minutes, became proof. In war, sometimes the most dangerous thing is the mind that refuses to accept the rules. Planning, rejection, trial, and finally a single bullet through the fog. At first, nobody took Harlan seriously. The very idea of turning a Sherman's turret backwards, of treating a tank like a sniper rifle, sounded insane. The crew called it hillbilly logic. They said he was trying to fight tanks like a squirrel hunts deer. Sit still, wait, and hope something big and slow crosses your sights. Sergeant Corbin, their commander, made it clear. This isn't the kind of war where you sit back and take your sweet time. You see a panther, you shoot fast or you die faster. But Harlan didn't back down. He kept sketching, calculating, scribbling formulas into a mud-stained notebook. Elevation angles, drop rates, armor thickness at oblique hits. He studied the M3's 75mm cannon like a scientist obsessed with an experiment no one else believed in. He memorized the specs of the HVAP rounds, high-velocity, armor-piercing, capable of cutting through 120mm of steel at 500 yards. But he also knew the limits. Past that distance, velocity dropped. Luck wouldn't help him. Math would. He started scouting terrain differently than everyone else, searching for ambush positions with long sight lines and natural cover. Hillsides, clearings, forest corridors where German armor moved in single file, blind and confident. A Sherman hidden there, turret turned backward like a coiled snake, could strike once and vanish. Still, nobody approved it. Not until mid-November. The forest was drowned in rain. Mud sucked at boots and swallowed tanks whole. Every morning, shells screamed overhead until noon. Men were wet, sleepless, half-mad from nerves. Then came the breaking point. A friendly Sherman took a direct hit near the village of Wassenack. The explosion ripped its turret clean off. Nothing left to bury. That night, Harlan decided he was done waiting for permission. At dawn, he pulled Rizzo, his loader, aside. "Let's test it," he whispered. They slipped out on patrol, pretending routine. But instead of taking the standard route, Harlan parked the tank in a patch of trees overlooking a misty field. He turned the turret 180 degrees, adjusted elevation, and waited. Hours passed. Then, wind, distant gunfire, then movement. 2 German motorcycles, scouts, cutting lazily through the clearing. Harlan tracked them through the gun sight, steady as stone. He didn't fire, not worth revealing their position. But something clicked. The geometry worked. The shot was there. When they returned to camp, Corbin tore into him for straying from orders. Harlan said nothing, because he didn't need to prove it with words. He'd seen it work in his head, and through that sight. The next day, the chance came. A lone Panther was prowling near a ridge west of Schmidt, ambushing supply lines, vanishing before artillery or aircraft could respond. Command was desperate. Corbin, half-mocking, turned to Harlan. "You still think that squirrel tactic of yours can work? Fine. Get up there and prove it. One chance. One shot." Harlan picked a narrow, muddy road near a clearing, a place the Panther might cross without cover. He reversed the Sherman into the brush, turret facing out. A steel predator lying in wait. Fog rolled in heavy, blinding. Visibility dropped to less than 100 yards. Then movement. A shadow in the mist. The curved snout of a Panther's turret, gliding through the white like a shark's fin. Harlan didn't wait for the full body. He exhaled, made one final correction, and squeezed the trigger. The 75mm roared. The shell screamed through the fog. Then impact. A thunderclap of fire and shrapnel. The forest lit like lightning. The Panther convulsed, fire tearing through its hull. One crewman stumbled out, a flame. Another tried to crawl. Then silence. Confirmed kill. First shot. Turret backward. No one laughed after that. That single round didn't just destroy a tank. It rewrote the doctrine. From that day forward, the hillbilly tactic had a name whispered in after-action briefings. Vickery's reverse setup. And for Harlan Vickery, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a legend, forged in the death-trap woods of Hürtgen Forest. It was a meat grinder spread across 50 square miles of tangled, unforgiving woodlands along the German border, the place where any American hope of a quick victory went to die. Fog clung to the ground. Mines waited like teeth beneath the mud. Artillery fell so constantly it became part of the air itself. More than 33,000 American casualties would be recorded there. More than at the Bulge. In November 1944, Harlan Vickery and his crew were thrown into that maw. Orders were simple and brutal: hold the call trail and push toward Schmidt. The road was little more than a muddy scar through ravines and steep hills. The enemy had the high ground. Trees were wired with booby traps. German 88mm guns were zeroed on the trail's bends. Panthers and Jagdpanzers lurked in the fog like wolves. Every corner, Harlan would later write home, felt like a death sentence. You never knew whether the next step would be mud or metal and fire. Their Sherman, C-113, was battered but still rolling. Corbin's jaw was tight. Rizzo's jokes had stopped. Harlan grew quieter, not from fear but from focus. The backward shot in the Hürtgen had not been luck. It had been calculation. Now he wanted to expand it. Not a single ambush, but a full sniper setup that could turn a funnel in the road into a killing field. He found a choke point near the ridge above WWII Creek. The ground dropped away there, forcing any armored column to slow, pivot, and expose its flanks as it crossed. Harlan proposed a camouflage position at the tree line. The turret reversed, the hull canted just enough to present a tougher angle to the enemy while the 75mm covered the funnel. It wasn't doctrine. It wasn't mutiny either. It was survival. Corbin hesitated. "This is a Sherman, not some damn rifle on treads," he said. "If we meet them head-on," Harlan answered, "they'll slice us in half." After hours of tense arguing, Corbin relented. One shot, one chance. They moved before dawn. The forest held its breath. Water dripped from branches, and the only sound was the occasional snap of frozen wood. They parked C-113 in a hollow behind a pile of fallen trunks and low brush. Vickery trained the 75mm on the clearing, calculating the arc and the obliquity. Every degree mattered. Then they waited. The fog thickened until the world was a smear. Then came a mechanical rumble, the crunch and thud of tracks. One tank, then two, then three. Panthers, just as Harlan had predicted, sliding out of the tree line like predators surfacing. The lead paused, scanning. In a few more feet it would present its side plate, the armor's soft underbelly. Harlan barely breathed. He adjusted the sights with surgical calm. "Target locked," he whispered. The 75mm cracked. The Sherman shuddered back on its suspension as the round screamed through the fog and slammed into the Panther's flank. Metal screamed. Fire erupted. The turret blew upward. The tank folded in on itself and black smoke hurled into the sky. The other two Panthers spun their turrets hunting for the shooter, but Harlan was already working. Rizzo slammed another round home. Harlan tweaked his aim and let go again. The second shot found dirt at the second Panther's track, throwing up earth and choking smoke. The third tank fired blindly into the mist. Corbin hit the accelerator and drove C-113 forward out of its hiding place, sliding behind a tree-covered embankment. 2 hits, 1 confirmed kill, and the Panthers were firing into a white void. Chaos reigned. Corbin barked a report over the radio. Enemy armor engaged. 1 destroyed. Vickery's sniper setup is working. I repeat, working. Headquarters answered with stunned silence more than disbelief. But the reply didn't matter. The enemy pulled back. For that moment, the forest belonged to them. The shot that rang out through the fog didn't just destroy a Panther. It shattered an idea. For years, crews had believed Shermans only survived by swarming, by outnumbering, never outthinking. Yet one man had just outgunned 3 enemies using a tactic no field manual had ever imagined. The forest, drenched in death and silence, now bore witness to something it had never seen before. A Sherman sniper. What began as a crazy theory whispered in the mud was on its way to legend. Word of the shot spread faster than the fog could settle. By evening, crews across the sector were talking over cold rations and cigarettes. "Did you hear about Vickery?" one gunner said. "Took out a Panther backwards." Most laughed. Some swore it was luck. But at dawn, a reconnaissance patrol confirmed the kill. The Panther's turret blown clean off. A neat entry hole punched through its side armor. Doubt died with that confirmation. Harlan Vickery had done what almost no one in Europe had managed. He dropped a Panther with a single long-range shot from a 75mm Sherman and vanished without ever being seen. Sergeant Corbin, who once called it the dumbest idea he'd heard, now had a name for it: Vickery's Vantage. When headquarters demanded a report, Corbin didn't embellish. "Private Vickery's positioning and firing method are unorthodox but effective," he wrote. "Request permission for further testing of the reverse turret sniper tactic." No approval came, no denial either, so they kept doing it. 2 days later, near the town of Kammerscheid, Vickery tried again. He backed C-113 into the treeline along a narrow track where German armor liked to flank the line. Engine off, turret turned. They waited. Dusk fell. Out of the mist rolled a Panzer IV followed by 2 half-tracks. Vickery fired once. The Panzer erupted, lighting the trees like a storm. The half-tracks scattered, infantry diving for cover. When the smoke cleared, the Kentucky rifle, as Rizzo had begun calling their tank, hadn't taken a scratch. Now everyone believed. Corbin joked about painting a squirrel mascot on the hull. Crews from other companies came by to ask his settings, elevation, distance math, what shell he used. And quietly, other tankers began copying him. The Hürtgen Forest had become a slaughterhouse for anyone fighting by the book. You couldn't brute force through mines and ambushes. You had to think smarter, shoot stranger, and that's exactly what Vickery did. But fame brought danger. The Germans adapted. They sent scouts ahead, shelled treelines, and even fired blind barges into suspected hideouts. One Panther tried its own counter-sniper move, lobbing high-explosive rounds into the woods before advancing. A shell landed 20 feet from C-113. Shrapnel hissed through the trees. Dirt rained down inside the hatch. Rizzo cursed, Corbin gunned the engine, and somehow they lived. They were shaken but not stopped. By then they understood they weren't just surviving, they were changing the war. Between Kammerscheit and Schmidt, amid the stink of cordite, frozen boots, and jammed radios, Harlan Vickery, farm kid, quiet thinker, the math brain nobody noticed, became something new. An armored sniper. A myth with a name. A turret pointed the wrong way. And as November 26, 1944 dawned, the forest itself was about to explode. The Germans, desperate to halt the Allied push to the Rohr River, launched a furious counterattack along the K Trail and into the villages of Kammerscheit and Schmidt, straight toward the man who had turned a Sherman into a rifle. The forest was alive with thunder. American infantry were being shredded by artillery, pinned down by machine guns dug so deep they seemed part of the earth. Panther tanks crept forward through narrow, mined roads, their advance shadowed by mortars and tree-burst shells that rained shrapnel like metallic snow. Harlan Vickery's unit was ordered to hold the southern edge of Kammerscheit. No backup, no air cover, just a few Shermans, a handful of scattered riflemen, and enough ammunition to last maybe a day. The message was simple. If you lose this ridge, we lose the line. By dawn, the fog was back. Thicker, heavier, as if the forest itself didn't want to see what came next. Harlan positioned C-113 behind a low stone wall at the edge of the village, turret reversed, facing away from the road. Corbin watched him in silence, then said quietly, "Vickery, if they hit us here, we've got nowhere to run." "We're not going to run," Harlan replied. "We're going to hit first." No one argued. Each man took his place. Rizzo checked the ammunition racks, 2 HVAP rounds first, then armor-piercing, then smoke. The gunner's hands were steady, the loaders fast. They waited. Then the ground began to shake. The deep growl of engines rose through the fog. Panthers, 3 of them, moving in formation with infantry covering their flanks. They advanced with precision, expecting resistance from the front, never imagining death was waiting from the side. Turret reversed like a trap. The first tank appeared as a silhouette through the haze. Harlan exhaled slowly, adjusted elevation. 700 yards. He could barely make out the outline, but it was enough. He fired. The 75mm roared. The shell hit low, smashing through the Panther's drive sprocket. The beast lurched to a halt, crippled. Fire burst beneath its hull, licking outward as it sagged to one side. The second Panther reacted instantly, swinging its turret toward the blast. Its gun flashed. An 88mm round tore through trees, showering debris. One exploded just behind C-113, shaking the Sherman so hard dust fell from the roof plates. "Reload!" Harlan shouted. Rizzo slammed in another HVAP shell. Harlan adjusted. The second Panther had exposed its turret ring, just enough. He squeezed the trigger. The round slammed home. The turret lifted clear off the hull, spinning before crashing down in a burst of fire. The Panther convulsed, then went still, flames crawling out of its open hatches. Then came the third. It had seen them. The turret turned slowly, deliberate, deadly. "Move!" Harlan yelled. Corbin jammed the throttle, but the tracks slipped in the mud. The Sherman jolted, stuck fast. The German guns steadied on them, one breath away from firing. Then boom! A second explosion, but not from the Panther. A shell from another Sherman, an American, smashed into the German tank from the opposite flank. Reinforcements, drawn by radio chatter, smoke, and luck. The third Panther twisted to return fire but never got the chance. A crossfire ripped through it. One shell struck the hull. Another detonated its ammunition. The tank vanished in a column of black smoke. Then silence. 3 Panthers destroyed. C-113 still standing, scarred, scorched, but alive. Medics rushed in. Infantry pushed forward. The ridge for now held. Harlan slumped against the turret wall, his hands trembling for the first time since the Hürtgen shot. "You all right?" Rizzo asked softly. "Yeah," Harlan muttered, staring into the smoke. "What are you thinking?" "That was the shot I was afraid of," he said. "The one where you're already dead before you pull the trigger." But he had pulled it and he'd won. The first shot through the fog had been theory. The shot under fire was proof. That day, Officers began calling his method long gun doctrine. Some wanted to write it up. Others didn't know what to make of it. But among the tank crews who fought, froze, and bled in those woods, Harlan Vickery's name became more than a rumor. It meant nerve, the courage to think backward in a war that demanded forward. The imitators came next. The doubters followed. But trust was slower. Across the 20th Armored Division, whispers spread. Some crews tested the reverse turret method quietly, unofficially. Most didn't. Not because they doubted the results. 5 confirmed kills, including 2 Panthers and a Panzer IV, all without a scratch to C-113, but because it defied everything they'd been taught. Tank doctrine said, face forward, fire, maneuver, keep moving. Vickery said, wait, think, strike once. Reversing into position, sitting still, turret backward, it looked suicidal on paper. Against German 88s, one mistake could turn a Sherman into vapor. But the math didn't lie. The kills added up. And now, higher-ups were asking questions not just about Vickery but about the Sherman itself. Could a tank long mocked as underpowered actually dominate through brains instead of brawn? Could a single gunner, calm, quiet, methodical, change the way men fought in steel? In the heart of the Hürtgen Forest, Harlan Vickery had already answered. He just hadn't lived long enough to know how far his answer would travel. Harlan didn't care about debates or doctrine. He cared about the men inside the tank, about staying alive, and above all about not wasting a single shot. One night over cold stew, he told a junior crew member, "You don't fire unless you're sure. Every shell costs more than metal. It costs time, noise, and your position." Other gunners fired by instinct. Harlan fired by thought. Fame brought friction. Colonel Bennett dismissed the tactic in a briefing flatly. Turning the turret backward was a good way to die looking the wrong way. "This war is about mobility, not hiding in the brush," he said. Harlan didn't argue. He only replied, cool and quiet, "With all due respect, sir, cowards don't sit still when Panthers roll into view." The room fell silent. Corbin backed him. 2 other commanders vouched for what they'd seen. Piece by piece, the brass loosened. Unofficial allowances appeared in the margins. Permission to adapt when the situation demanded. By December, several crews in the division had tried modified reverse setups. 2 scored confirmed kills. A crew of the 77th Tank Battalion credited the method with saving them during an ambush west of Gay. They reversed into a ruined barn, waited, and nailed a Panzer as it crept past. They'd started calling their vehicle the Vickery Special. But Harlan never wanted the name. He still scrubbed the bore by hand each night, still logged each shot, angle, and result in a battered notebook. Every time they moved, he mapped fields of fire, blind spots, and escape routes. He'd become more than a gunner, he was a tactician. Winter came hard. Snow blanketed the forest. Cold sunk into bone and morale. Mud froze into jagged ruts. Frostbite took fingers and toes. Even Panthers stalled in sub-zero engines. C-113 wore its dents, soot, and scorch marks like a warning. Harlan grew quieter, steadier. Artillery no longer made him flinch. Shrapnel through a birch barely registered. What haunted him was the silence after a shot. That suspended second when he knew another crew might never climb out of their burning steel. He wrote home, "I don't know how to feel. Every shot saves us, but it also means someone else's son won't come home." Rizzo stopped joking. Corbin got protective. Harlan began carrying a photo of his 8-year-old sister, Leia, hair in braids, taped above the rangefinder. A small promise to remember why he aimed. Necessity drove invention. Near Bergstein, Harlan parked C-113 on a slope and fired downhill at a Tiger rolling the road below. The shot found the rear engine plate and the Tiger died where it stood. 1 round, 1 kill, not arrogance but economy of force. Every shell had to count. The more successes mounted, the less the brass questioned and the more they quietly used Harlan, assigning him to forward observation and to set up kill zones for other crews. They even brought a second Sherman alongside C-113 to act as bait and backup when the line tightened. Harlan accepted the role without pride. He still cleaned barrels and calculated ballistics by lamplight. He still watched the trees and listened for engines. But the boy who fixed tractors in Kentucky had become something the Army hadn't planned for. A slow, patient instrument of precision in a brutal, impulsive war. Every adaptation carried a cost. Every innovation made new enemies and new targets. And with winter closing in, the next battle would demand everything he had learned. They sent a second crew to learn directly from him, but Harlan never saw himself as a teacher. He still thought of himself as lucky. A farm kid who'd somehow outlived the smarter, stronger, louder men around him. He didn't think of doctrine or innovation. He thought of keeping his friends alive. One night, after their 20th mission, Corbin asked quietly through the dark, "What happens when this war's over?" Harlan looked down at his hands. Calloused, scarred, blackened by oil and burned from hot shell casings. "I guess I go home," he said. "Fix tractors again. Maybe teach my sister how to drive." For a long time, the tank was silent. No engines. No shells. Just the wind moving through the broken trees and the memory of a boy who'd rewritten the rules. Not to be a hero, but to bring himself and his brothers home. The boy who learned to snipe with a tank. When the snow finally melted over the wreckage of the Hürtgen Forest, it revealed more than shell holes and rusted armor. It revealed the ghosts of a doctrine undone, not by firepower, but by thought. Among those ghosts lingered the quiet legacy of one young man, Harlan Vickery. He didn't change the war through rank or command. He held no title, led no battalion, and no medal bore his name. What he did have was rarer, a mind that refused to accept the way things had always been done. Official reports never mentioned him. They spoke instead of innovative turret positioning and nonlinear armored deployment. The bureaucrats called it asymmetric utilization. But the crews who came back alive didn't use words like that. They just said, "He showed us we could fight smarter." By January 1945, Vickery's tactics had spread beyond rumor. Some commanders quietly began ordering their crews to scout like snipers, to treat terrain as camouflage, to fire not first, but best. But Harlan wasn't there to see it. After a third near miss, a shell that killed the Sherman crew beside his, he asked to be rotated out. Not from fear but fatigue. He'd proven what he came to prove. He'd seen enough men die inches away, so they let him go. When the train pulled into Kentucky that spring, there were no crowds, no medals, no speeches. His little sister, Leia, ran up and hugged him. His father handed him a wrench. His mother set another plate at the table. Harlan always said that was the best kind of welcome. He never built a career on what he'd done. Never wrote a book. Never called himself a sniper. But if you drove past the Vickery place in the 1960s, you might have seen an old war shell sitting on the mantel. Polished, empty, harmless. If you asked him about it, he'd smile and say, "That's the one that let me come home." It's easy to glorify war in hindsight, to count victories, tanks destroyed, enemies beaten. But stories like Harlan Vickery's remind us that war isn't about numbers. It's about decisions, small, quiet, terrifying decisions made by men no one notices until history has already turned. Harlan didn't win through firepower. He won through defiance, through the courage to ask a question no one else dared to. What if I turn the turret around? In that single, almost foolish question lay the seed of everything that followed: lives saved, doctrines changed. A new way of thinking born not in a classroom but in the cold gut of a young man inside a steel box. Maybe that's the real legacy of soldiers like him. Not the number of kills, but the number of lives that didn't have to die. Because one man decided to look at the battlefield backwards.